In the pantheon of horror cinema, Psycho stands tall as a seminal work credited with birthing the modern slasher genre. Released in 1960 and directed by Alfred Hitchcock, its provocative themes and chilling story redefined what a thriller could accomplish. But only months before Psycho's groundbreaking debut, another film laid the foundation for the slasher archetype and dared to critique its audience along the way. Michael Powell's Peeping Tom, released on April 7, 1960, not only predates Psycho but arguably outpaces it in complexity and cultural commentary. The origins of slasher horror, a forgotten pioneer. While slashers like Friday the 13th or Halloween are synonymous with the genre's unapologetic violence and relentless villains, Peeping Tom feels like an ancestor in many respects. The film follows Mark Lewis, Karl-Heinz Bohm, a shy and disturbed cameraman who murders women while filming their dying expressions of fear. His obsession with recording these moments stems from psychological trauma, adding layers of depth to his character. Much like Norman Bates in Psycho, Mark represents the archetypal loner whose unhealthy relationship with intimacy fuels their violence. However, Powell takes this idea further by humanizing Mark's victims and providing insight into their lives, turning their deaths into something truly tragic rather than mere spectacle. A subtle yet devastating critique of its own genre. Empathy is a rare quality in slasher films, where characters often exist solely as fodder for creative death sequences. Powell challenges this norm by giving his characters dimension, particularly Viv and Helen, two women whose lives are explored in detail before becoming targets of Mark's twisted fixation. Viv's vibrancy, brought to life by Moira Shearer's charismatic performance, makes her fate especially devastating. Unlike the gratuitous gore of many modern slashers, Peeping Tom uses restraint to evoke terror. Powell's approach relies on psychological tension, emphasizing atmosphere over shock value. Each moment of violence is meticulously framed from Mark's point of view, implicating the viewer in his voyeurism. This framing serves as an unflinching mirror, forcing audiences to confront their own complicity in consuming violent cinema. Meta-commentary decades ahead of its time. Perhaps the most groundbreaking aspect of Peeping Tom lies in its meta-narrative. Powell doesn't just tell a story about a killer, he interrogates why people watch such stories. Mark's obsession with documenting and replaying his murders parallels how audiences engage with horror films, finding morbid fascination in fictional violence. Powell raises uncomfortable questions about the ethics of consuming entertainment centered on human suffering. This commentary feels even more relevant today, as horror franchises like Saw and Terrifier push boundaries with excessive gore while reveling in audience reactions. With its pointed critique, Peeping Tom prefigures later films like Scream and The Cabin in the Woods, which deconstruct horror tropes with similar sharpness. Legacy and rediscovery. Despite its innovative storytelling and deep thematic underpinnings, Peeping Tom suffered a harsh reception upon release. Critics lambasted its disturbing content, labeling it perverse and sickening. The backlash derailed Powell's career, leaving the film in obscurity for decades, overshadowed by Hitchcock's comparatively palatable Psycho. In hindsight, Peeping Tom offers a richer exploration of its subject matter than Psycho and remains strikingly progressive for its era. While many slashers have been criticized for misogynistic tropes, Powell's film critiques this very tendency. By humanizing its victims and giving their deaths emotional weight, it avoids the exploitative pitfalls that define much of the genre. A horror masterpiece that deserves recognition. Over 60 years later, Peeping Tom is finally receiving its due as a cornerstone of horror cinema. It paved the way for psychological thrillers and slashers alike while holding up a mirror to the audience's own darker impulses. Powell's unflinching look at voyeurism and violence ensures Peeping Tom remains relevant in a genre often content to rehash familiar formulas. While films like Psycho, Halloween, and Nightmare on Elm Street have cemented their status as cultural milestones, it's time for Peeping Tom to take its rightful place as the true originator of the slasher genre.